never minded asking the questions like, why do we do it this way? Have we considered other ways? And I think people would be surprised how many times organizations haven't considered other ways. They just get used to doing it a certain way. How can we create something that's unique that our competitors can't copy? And I've always kind of said, let's not look at how it's done. Let's just look at how it can be done and really look at it through the customer's eyes. You've got to do multiple things, and you've got to just be okay that some are going to succeed and some aren't. How can we create something that's unique that our competitors can't copy? And I've always kind of said, let's not look at how it's done. Let's just look at how it can be done and really look at it through the customer's eyes.
Hi everyone. Today we're joined by Brendan Keegan, a visionary leader and CEO of Merchants Fleet. In 2009, he joined Merchants Fleet as a board member and now serves as its chairman, president, and CEO. Under his leadership, the company was included in the Inc. 5000 list in 2020 and committed $2.5 billion to electric vehicles in 2021. By 2022, Merchants Fleet was named one of the world's most innovative companies by Fast Company, and Brendan led its acquisition by Bain Capital and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. As an author of The FUD Factor and co-host of the Fast and Fearless podcast, Brendan is here to share his journey and insights on leading with a challenger mindset. So let's go. All right, Brendan Keegan, thanks for being on the show. We're honored to have you. You've got such an incredible background, both leading large-scale enterprises as well as now in the startup world and high-growth, early-stage ventures. You are seen as somewhat of a disruptor. You are able to see opportunities, get into a business, really reposition it, and take it to the next level. But I want to hear from you on how it all started. Where did this passion for business come about? Talk us through your early years and how you got into your first gig.
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for having me. Excited to share some stories with your audience today, and maybe one or two things come out of it that somebody learned something from, and it helps them in their trajectory. So, I started as a programmer. I started programming COBOL back in the day. I did that for a period of time and then moved into account management and sales. Never did I think I'd go into sales, but I actually loved it, interacting with people. And what I found that I liked was I liked solving problems. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I learned when I was actually in sales. I never thought of myself as selling. I thought of myself as problem solving. And then, I got my first really big career break in the late 90s as chief sales officer of a Fortune 100 company. Really exciting. But part of what I was able to do, and the reason I got that is, we were organized in 50 units, and I had just thrown out an idea of why don't we centralize sales and compete as one sales team of 1,200 versus 50 sales teams of 10 and 20. And so I guess that problem solving, that disruptive thinking really kind of started there. I think some of that is I've never minded asking the questions like, why do we do it this way? Have we considered other ways? And I think people would be surprised how many times organizations haven't considered other ways. They just get used to doing it a certain way. And then that was the late 90s when the tech boom was taking off. So me and a friend, left the Fortune 100 world, built the startup. We got a check from Cisco for 90 million and Dell for 10. So we were kind of a pretty well-funded startup at 100 million and built that up. I was smart enough not to go in as CEO. I didn't have the experience. I went in as the number two. After doing that for a few years, when we sold it, I actually took my first CEO role. And that's what I've done for the last 25 years, 6 different companies, 1 venture-backed, 5 private equity-backed, each one kind of bigger than the previous one. But one thing I've looked for in each of them is how can we create something that's unique that our competitors can't copy? And I've always kind of said, let's not look at how it's done. Let's just look at how it can be done and really look at it through the customer's eyes.
So when you go into these companies and you're evaluating the differentiation, the opportunity, What are the things you're looking for before you even take the role as a CEO?
Yeah, one thing I look at is, I just put out a book called Dare to Disrupt, like how to have transformational growth. And I talk about 8 pillars that the company needs. And the first 3 pillars are leadership, culture, people. So I really hone in on the leadership, culture, and people, in that, are the leaders performing at an elite level, at a high level? What's holding them back? Because oftentimes they're not. Is it the leaders themselves? Is it the company doesn't have a clear vision? Is it the existing CEO, hasn't put that vision there? And then I really look to the culture. Is the culture driving innovation? I'll give you an example. A company that my last company I was at, innovation was one of their 5 values. And I was in a board meeting and I said, okay, guys, innovation is one of your values. They're like, yeah. I go, all right, tell me 3 innovations you had last year. And that was the answer. Like, we just kind of all stared at each other. And I said, guys, if innovation is a value, you should have said, oh, Brendan, 3, we could give you 30. Mm-hmm. So, I think a lot of companies, and by the way, I think if you scan companies, a lot of companies will have, innovation as a value. But then when you really push, like, what are you doing? Are you training your people? Do you have innovation coaches? I think you'll see they come up short. So with that, I really look at, do they have the people? Do they have the culture? Most times they don't. And then I'm looking at, do they have the willingness to instill a new culture and do whatever we need to with the people? The people is interesting. I think is the easiest one, because people want to be part of a winning team. People want to be part of a growth company, because in a growth company, there's opportunities, there's promotions, there's ability to try new things. People really want to be a part of that. And they love that when you're winning in the marketplace. It's, do they have the leadership and the culture in place, and then are you able to impact that in a positive way?
I want to take that one step further. I'm a big believer in, winning is a great recruitment strategy.
Right? Oh, yeah.
And winning in the marketplace. I want to talk to you about execution, because a lot of companies are full of employees that are busy, and in my mind, busy is the worst KPI, right? How do you define flawless execution, and what are the things you look for in people working on the right things to move the company forward?
Yeah, to me that starts with leadership that holds that is accountable to themselves, leadership that's accountable to their teams, and then leadership that's accountable to their customers and their shareholders. So if you drive a high performance culture of extreme accountability, where as a CEO, my job is to give all my direct reports goals, and not give goals, by the way, end of January and say, oh, we're kicking the year off. No, the year kicked off January 1st. Giving them to them beginning of December, so they have the month of December to take those goals and roll them to their team below that, so that when you kick off the year, everybody in the company has their goals, but an individual contributor has goals, and they understand how their goals go up to their managers and go up and meet the overall company's goals. So it's sort of like, last night there was the national championship game in college football. There might be players that only play 4 or 5 plays a game. They're on special teams. They're a gunner on the punt team, but they have to be great for those 5 plays. And they know that if they're great for those 5 plays, they did their part to help win the game. So I think as a company, you got to do the same thing. Every person has to know what their role is, how it fits into your company strategy, and that if they do their role, and if everyone does their role, kind of given the Belichick, do your job, if everyone does their job, that you are going to win. And I know that sounds really simple, but it is that simple. And, I'm actually traveling later this week to a company, and, they're working on their business plan right now. They're working on their financial plan right now. So not only do they not have goals, they don't have their financial plan yet. And I'm not picking on them, but it's like, well, that's going to be really tough for your employees to know what you're expecting of them this year when it's coming up on the end of January and you don't have a plan yet. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's all about, right at the top, the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, the head of sales, whomever, setting the tone, at the beginning of the year, saying, this is what we're going to accomplish this year. And here's how, your 5 plays. Here's how your role fits into that master plan.
Very insightful. Now, Brandon, you're seen somewhat as the growth guru. You can help companies grow and scale exponentially. So tell me, how do you build a growth culture where everyone on the roster, not just sales, is focused on growing the company?
Yeah, so some of that goes back to, everyone knowing what their role is. And then it really comes up with having, building a value prop, building a business model that is unique. So I'll go back to my last company. It was Merchants Fleet. I actually had been their largest customer, so I knew them pretty well. And I remember I was getting onboarded by them, so I'm getting onboarded as a board member. I went from being a customer to a board member. And during the board member meeting, they told me that they did rentals. And I said, geez, when I was a customer, I never knew you had rentals. So they did like van rentals, truck rentals. And the person looked at me with a straight face and said, oh, that's because you were a customer of the other division. And my answer to them was, so it's not my job to know your organization. So I could have been a much bigger client, but I didn't know everything they did. But that was their organization. So when I went into that company, I took 7 companies and collapsed it into one and said, nobody in the entire fleet industry offers long-term leasing, short-term leasing, and rentals. And now there's reasons, because they're different systems, it's hard. But I said, if we can do that, we can have something unique. That's what we did. And we wound up taking companies like Tesla and Amazon and Terminix from our biggest competitors, because clients said, wait, I don't have to use 3 companies anymore. I don't have to use, Element and Budget and Enterprise. I can use one. So that was just offering your customers something better, something different. By the way, we had lots of people that didn't pick us, and they said, no, like you're the new company, you're a young company, you're a smaller company, and that's fine. Not everyone's going to buy in, but those that did, allowed us to grow the company 5x in 4 years, top line. So how do you build something that's going to provide your customers something that other people aren't able to get?
So Brendan, you've gone through the journey of building a company, getting it funded, ultimately selling it to Bain Capital. For many of the audience who are going through their first capital raise, maybe contemplating having private equity now invest in their company, can you share any insights, pros and cons about the process and what you learned from it?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is make sure you have a process. So what I mean by that, every once in a while you might get approached by one potential investor group, one private equity firm, one venture capital firm, whatever. And you kind of get enamored with them and you say, wow, like I really like them, and you go with them. I think that's great. But what I'd say is run a process, so, bring in an investment bank, bring in, depending on your size of company, you could bring in a business broker, but really get a chance to meet multiple companies. And I think when you do that, you'll actually find like different companies offer you different things. Some will offer you money on great terms. Another one will offer you money and resources. Another one will offer you money, and they have 4 other portfolio companies that do very similar things, that if you were to come together and create, one company. So I always try, first of all, to run a process. By the way, when you run a process, you also tend to get better terms because they know it's competitive. And I think, if they know it's competitive, it's sort of like if you've ever sold before, the second you say procurement's involved, you're like, oh, procurement's involved. Like, that, okay, I got to sharpen my pencil. I got to get a better deal. So if you're giving away equity or you're paying, debt at a certain rate, you're going to get a better deal if you run a process. But I think you're going to get a better partner, because you're really going to have met different people across different backgrounds. I remember, when we sold Merchants, it was Bain Capital and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA. I had never interacted with ADIA before. I hadn't pitched them, and they have nearly $1 trillion, and they're extremely patient capital. So, and they had also owned a competitor of ours that had sold earlier, so they knew the industry. So I said, not only am I getting somebody who's going to be patient, not only am I going to get somebody who has unlimited resources, virtually unlimited resources, I'm going to get somebody who actually understands what we do. But if you had asked me at the beginning of the process, hey, write all the companies down that you think would be good, I never would have put them on a piece of paper. So run a process. Second is know what you want. Like, know what you want out of it. Because sometimes you get enamored with, one company, you get enamored with the process, you get enamored with something. I had a friend that they sold their business. It was a family-owned business, and they sold it to arguably the largest food conglomerate in the world. And a year later, I saw him. Our kids played lacrosse together. And I said, how's it going? He goes, horrible. It's going horrible. Like, they changed our brand. They did this. They did this. Now, I never said this, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, of course they did. You sold it to the biggest conglomerate in the world. So I think they got enamored with maybe the purchase price, but they didn't think that they wanted their family's name to continue on their product. And by the way, I wasn't involved in the process, so I don't know if that was important or not important. But know what's important to you, because if you pick A, you might get it. But if you pick B and you sell to a very large institution, you aren't going to have the say that you might have if you sold to a different type of organization. So make sure you're clear on what you want. And then third is, have an exit plan for yourself. So, I agreed to stay on 2 years after selling. I thought, hey, I ran it for 5, another 2. And at some point, I think it's just good to bring in another voice. And so, I had an exit plan, and then I had my exit plan. And I think that's important so that you kind of know when to step away and do it in a positive way.
And Brendan, you wrote a book that is an incredible read, helping business owners and entrepreneurs. Maybe share with us what's in there.
Yeah, so I had a book come out in November, and it's actually trending really well. I think it's #1 in 7 categories, like strategic management and a few others. And it's really about, it's called Dare to Disrupt. It's like, how do you disrupt an industry? How do you go after an industry in a unique way? And it's got 8 pillars. And I had mentioned earlier, the first 3 pillars are leadership, culture, people. The 4th pillar is systems. If you want to scale a business, you got to make sure to implement systems so that you can maintain that high level of customer service. 5th is IQ. So, IQ isn't first, it's 5th. Then EQ, having the emotional intelligence as you build your business. Flexibility, you set out a business plan and then good things happen, bad things happen. Are you able to remain flexible and take advantage of opportunities and, good ideas that you had that turned out not to be good ideas? Are you willing to shut those down and be flexible? And then the 8th pillar, one of my favorite pillars, is be fearless. Just literally just say, we're gonna try this. I remember, my first day when I joined Merchants, I said, we're going to start 3 businesses this year. One's going to be wildly successful, one's going to be moderately successful, and one's going to be a complete failure. And immediately people are like, well, why would we start it if it's a failure? I go, because we don't know which one's going to be wildly successful, and we don't know which one's going to fail. We think all 3 are going to be wildly successful, or we wouldn't start them. I'm just telling you, one's going to fail. And by the way, when it fails, fail fast. Just sit there and wrap it up. I remember we started one where month 11, month 12, we're like, man, this is a hard business to run. You talked about execution. It's so hard to execute. And when we execute it well, do we make even any money? Because it just sucked up so many resources. I remember one day just sitting in a room going, hey, should we be doing this anymore? And people are like, well, we committed to it. I go, that doesn't matter. Should we be doing it? And that was the last day we ran that business. We exited it just because we realized, hey, we're putting good resources on it and it's not what we thought it was. Yet another business, took off from, we had 1,500 vans in it, it grew to 30,000, and none of us could have thought it was going to be that successful. So you've got to do multiple things, and you've got to just be okay that some are going to succeed and some aren't.
Brandon, in the last couple of minutes we have, I want to ask you about personal struggles, challenges, and obstacles. Every entrepreneur runs into a wall, and where they have to evaluate whether they keep going or they give up. Have you had any of those moments, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it in two phases. Early in my career, or earlier in my career, my number one challenge was my personal EQ. Um, I had low EQ in that I just thought you could muscle your way through everything. Um, it wasn't win at all cost. That sounds bad, but it was like we have to win, and it's almost like I wouldn't concede losing. And that, you might say, oh, that sounds like that's not a horrible trait. Well, when you're trying to run a company, it's really hard. It's hard on people. So, my first challenge was, how do I develop my EQ as a leader? And it's something that, I did an assessment, I read books, I got a coach. And I can say now, when I look many years later, it's actually become a strength. So it is that example of you can go from a weakness to a strength. And I think, when COVID hit and we went remote and hybrid and the workplace is so different now with 5 generations in the workplace. I think you need EQ today more than you needed it 20 years ago. So I think that would be my first challenge. My second was realizing that, and this is one I've also been able to overcome, is it's okay if you get to the end zone, you get to your goal a different way than you set out in your plan. I think sometimes I was like, okay, here's our plan. And, like flexibility, if you notice, flexibility was one of the 8 pillars. I think as I've matured and as I've run more companies, I think I've become more and more flexible at how you get there. I think, when I had less experience, it was, no, these were the plays we called. This is what we were going to do. And I think I had less flexibility. And I think that's why, like, when I put this book together, EQ and flexibility were 2 of the pillars. And those just came from, personal learnings of, if you're really trying to bring everybody in the company on board and you're getting everybody to do their job and you want, that gunner in the game for those 5 plays and you want them to be enthusiastic about those 5 plays and to do a great job, you have to have like really good EQ with them. And you have to, acknowledge them. Those 5 plays are as important to them as the 30 plays that the quarterback plays, and you got to make sure that you reward them both, equally and rightfully. So, I think those are the challenges that I've had to overcome, is just, personally EQ, and then later in my career, just it's okay to win in a different way than you set out. And that's where, I gave the example in my last company where, we're 11 months in on something that was a great idea. And we just saw it's still a good idea, but man, I don't know if we can make any money at it. And so it's okay just to say, okay, we're cutting that out of the plan and we're going to go put more resources on that other idea that's ahead of plan. And we're going to go overinvest in that.
Brendan Keegan, what an honor it is to have had you here. Thank you for making time. We could talk for hours, and I'm looking forward to having you back on the show. Appreciate it, and thanks again.
All right. Hey, I thank you so much. And one thing I always like to sign off by saying to folks is, in life, have the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. So thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care.